Another episode of Titans Tiers. If you're new to this series, we're grouping everyone on the Titans roster into one of 7 tiers based only on their performance from this season, and we're weighting the more recent games more heavily. I've updated the graphics a little bit. Instead of going from bad to good or good to bad, we're going to be going by position group, and I'm revealing each player individually. And we're starting with quarterback. Will Levis is coming off the best performance of his career against Miami. It wasn't perfect, but I think the comeback element of it, combined with the difficulty of some of these throws compared to the Atlanta game, which would probably be his second best game, I think that puts the Miami game over the top. And the main thing that's impressed me with Will Levis over the last 3 weeks really has been his improvement protecting the football, specifically when it comes to throwing the ball down the field. Now, he had 3 fumbles in the Colts game. 2 of those were 100% on Jalen Duncan. One of those you could kind of put it half on Will Levis, half on Dillon Radunz. And then he obviously had the screen pick 6 against the Dolphins, which I'll get into later. But in his first few starts, really Pittsburgh and Tampa Bay especially, he had some insane interception luck, a handful of dropped interceptions where he just didn't see a zone coverage defender over the middle of the field. And that was the biggest thing that concerned me over that stretch. He's pretty much eliminated that over the last few weeks. He had 1 interceptable pass against the Panthers, but other than that, he's been making really good decisions as far as where to go with the football. I'm sure that was a coaching point early on, and it has resulted in some indecisiveness and missed opportunities over the middle of the field. Against Miami, he threw a dig to Chris Moore off of play action where he had him wide open for like 5 seconds before he let go of it. And he took a sack against the Colts where he had D-Hop wide open on a curl route over the middle. So there's still a lot of room to improve there. It does kind of feel like he's guessing at this point, and we'll see if he can strike that balance between having the aggressiveness to try to fit it into tight windows and knowing when there's zone coverage defenders that could intercept it. Probably my second biggest concern from his first few starts was that he was kind of a statue in the pocket, but he's shown a lot more creativity out of structure recently. The touchdown on the first game-winning drive against Miami was a great example of breaking the pocket, manipulating those underneath defenders, creating an open window for himself. The accuracy is still not great. Recently, he's had a lot of low passes that were just uncatchable at the receiver's feet. He's not really a set his feet, every throw is going to look the exact same type of passer, and so I think the accuracy is going to be kind of inconsistent play to play. But probably the most impressive part about Will Levis so far has been his ball placement and touch throwing to the deep corner. A lot of the pre-draft discussion of Will Levis kind of made me feel like I was being gaslit, but one of the handful of legitimate film critiques that I didn't really understand was people saying that he couldn't throw with touch. That didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I mean, you watch his tape, he's layering the ball perfectly at every level, but he needs to do a much better job really with every aspect of throwing screen passes. The pick 6 falls on him. He needs to see Zach Sealer shaded over towards Tyjae Spears, but there were a few other screen passes and kind of trick play throws from that Dolphins game that could have easily been turnovers. And I've seen this pop up once or twice each of the last couple games where either he doesn't see a defender in the passing lane or he's got a defensive end in his face, he can't loft it over. He overthrew a slip screen to Tyjae Spears against the Colts. That's been, in my opinion, the biggest consistent problem over the last 3 or 4 weeks for Will Levis. So even though I am overall impressed with Will Levis, he's still going to go in the average tier. I don't have a good for a rookie curve, and I can't put him any higher than this, but definitely optimistic about what I've seen. I've got Tyjae Spears in the great tier. There is theoretically an elite tier. No one on the Titans has deserved to be in that so far, but he's so dynamic with the ball in his hands, almost guaranteed to make the first defender miss. He does everything that you want from a third down back at a high level. He catches the ball consistently. He's a great pass protector for a rookie, but I think he would thrive in a 3-down role regardless of what they do as far as re-signing Derrick Henry. I think he needs to be the number 1 running back option next season, and to me, he's pretty comfortably the Titans' best offensive player. Derrick Henry was actually going to join Tyjae Spears in the great tier, but I thought the Dolphins game was his worst game of the season. There have been other weeks where he didn't have a great yards per carry, but that's not necessarily the running back's fault, and the run blocking wasn't great in week 14, but he just looked as slow and plodding as I've ever seen him. I don't think he did a good job reading his blocks, and something that's been a consistent issue all season is that he goes down on first contact way more than he ever has, especially if you're able to get him in the lower half. It used to be that once he got 3 or 4 yards downfield, he would just brush through arm tackles easily, but at this point, it's more often that those arm tackles trip him up. He's still one of the Titans' best players, but I think especially when you compare him to Tyjae Spears, the difference is very clear to me. For receiver, I've got Chris Moore staying put in the average tier. He hasn't been able to keep up his insane yards per catch that he had early in the season, but in recent weeks, he's had a lot of production on those speed outs. He's quick and reliable, not the most dynamic player, but he's definitely exceeded my expectations. Nick Westbrook-Akine, I think, has been in the average tier for every one of these episodes. I'm gonna move him to below average. He's had a drop each of the last 3 weeks, and if you don't add anything in terms of route running, speed over the top, breaking tackles, you've got to at least be reliable catching the football. The goal line slant against Miami wasn't that bad, but it's kind of a what exactly do you do here type of situation. And then D-Hop is going to stay put in the good tier. He would be the next player that I bumped up to great if I had to, but it's really been the same thing all year. I love the reliable hands, contested catchability, willingness to commit offensive pass interference, but he is still held back in some situations by just not being able to beat man coverage. The chemistry though that he's developed with Will Levis, I think is going to be great for his development going forward. I think heading into this offseason, you're trying to either draft or sign a wide receiver 1. You keep D-Hop as wide receiver 2, take a flyer in the draft or free agency on someone you think could be a wide receiver 3, and then you let Treylon Burks basically just be icing on the cake. If he turns things around and actually develops into something, then that's great. You can never have too many good receivers, but Burks is going to stay in the bad tier. I don't think it's smart to count on him going forward. I posted a cut up with all of his routes from the Miami game on Twitter if you want to go check that out. The thing you got to keep in mind with that though is that the Dolphins under Fangio are a split safety match zone type of defense. If you watch that video I posted, he had probably 2 legit man coverage reps. He lost both of them, but it's still not a huge sample size to really evaluate his route running or separation ability. But he wasn't an elite separator coming out of college. He hasn't really shown that ever in the NFL. He's basically a deep threat contested catch receiver that this year can't catch the football. And Will Levis, understandably, just doesn't look his way that often. If he would have force fed him in week 14, he could have put up like 5 for 50 yards. But yeah, we still need to see more. I'm just not that optimistic about Treylon Burks. It's funny, there's a few players from the 2022 draft class, him, Ike Ekwonu, Kenny Pickett, players that I wasn't high on coming out of college, and then their rookie seasons to varying degrees were impressive to me. So I'm like, okay, I was wrong about these guys. And then year 2, they're playing a lot closer to my expectations. So maybe it's an odd year, even year type of thing. Chig Okonkwo is going to go up 1, climbing to the below average tier. There were 2 things that were holding him back from being as productive as everyone expected him to be. Number 1, he couldn't catch the football, and number 2, he was being asked to chip and help in pass protection a lot more than most tight ends. He's one of the faster tight ends in the NFL, but I would bet his average route depth is near the bottom of the league. Half the time he's going out on a route, he's spending the first 2 or 3 seconds helping out one of the offensive tackles. The drops have gotten a lot better recently. I'm optimistic that was just a mental thing he had to get over, and I think going forward, it is fair to count on him being a somewhat reliable weapon in the passing game. He's had his 3 highest single game receiving totals over the last 3 weeks, so he's on the rise, and hopefully he can continue to stack good games together. I've got Josh Whyle coming down 2 to the average tier. He hasn't been bad or anything. He just started out really high in the great tier. It was pretty much based on a 1-game sample size. He's still only playing about 20 snaps a game. He'll usually get 1 target. He made a really nice play after the catch against the Colts, and I haven't seen him winning as many blocks as he was early in the year, but he can at least hold up as an inline blocker. I'll put the play on the screen, but there was a really good example from the Colts game of what happens if you try to go 11 personnel with Chig Okonkwo as your tight end. This play is why his role will always be kind of limited. He just can't hold up against the defensive end. He is a pretty good blocker though when you get him out on the move and have him block linebackers and DBs. All right, moving on to the offensive line, we're gonna go left to right, starting with left tackle Jaelyn Duncan. 3 starts under his belt, and it's been pretty much what you would expect for a 6th round rookie. He's gonna go into the bad tier. The one consistent positive is that he's a pretty effective run blocker out on the move, but other than that, it's been pretty rough. He doesn't use his hands well at all in pass pro. He's a catch blocker. He's got okay pocket range, but he'll still give people a short corner pretty often and let them bend around the edge. He's extremely soft with his inside hand. Pass rushers pretty much always have a 2-way go with Jaelyn Duncan, really a 3-way go if they decide they want to hit him with power. None of this is about writing a player off. We see all the time after one offseason, they'll come back and look like a completely different player, but Jaelyn Duncan's ability to pass block at the NFL level is a work that's just starting to get in progress. They're on step 1. As a run blocker, like I said, he's extremely athletic. He's really good out on the move, but it's still not very good overall. On the backside of the play, where it should really just be an easy stalemate block, he'll let defenders get back into the picture. He doesn't do a great job with his assignments climbing to the second level. He'll get some nice initial push on a double team, him, but then he just won't come off the block and pick up the linebacker. And then on down blocks and reach blocks, his pad level is way too high to create any leverage. So Jaelyn Duncan's probably their worst current starter now that Andre Dillard and Christian Fulton are on IR. I mean, he had Colts fans thinking that Kwity Paye had turned the corner, but maybe he gets better, who knows. Peter Skoronski is going to stay put in the average tier, which I think is good for a rookie. He was on pace to have probably his worst game of the season in week 14. The first half matchup with Zach Sieler looked like a complete mismatch. He gave up a sack early in the game on a stunt. They had like a jet front with 2-3 techniques, and he wasn't anticipating the looper from the opposite side of the formation. He was really struggling as a run blocker. When he would establish contact, Zach Sieler's length was kind of overwhelming him, and there were times he just lost to quick hands and couldn't even get attached. And then Sieler was able to get him with kind of just a push-pull move and get a hit on Will Levis. The second half, he really turned it around, pretty much pitched a shutout. When it's good with Peter Skoronski, it's really good. Like, you see the elite hand technique. As long as he's staying square to blocks and being purposeful with his punch, either trying to strike quickly or be patient and bait out the pass rusher's punch, it's obvious why he was a first-round pick, but there still are some times where you can tell he's adjusting to NFL speed and strength. And it might seem like I'm kind of low on Peter Skoronski. That's really not the case. Most rookie offensive linemen are bad, and I would say he's been an average NFL guard. So rookie year, they're expected to struggle, but I am going to point out when those losses happen. Aaron Brewer is going to come back down to the average tier. He was in the same spot all season, and then last video, I finally decided he had done enough to move up to the solid tier. The pass pro still wasn't good, but it hadn't been as much of a problem in recent weeks. And then he follows that up with probably his worst game of the season against Jacksonville and tacks on a bad snap. It's a shame because he really has developed into one of the best run blocking centers in the NFL. If you watch the Colts game in week 13, I mean, he's pulling off reach blocks that maybe 2 centers in the NFL can do. He has so many plays on tape where he gets downfield so quickly that he just comes to a complete stop and waits for the safety to flow over to him. Normally, if an offensive lineman's climbing like 20 yards downfield, it's a dead sprint to try to reach their aiming point, but Aaron Brewer moves like a tight end. They had him pulling on one of Derrick Henry's touchdown runs. You hardly ever see NFL teams pull to center. So what he can do as a run blocker adds legitimate value to the Titans offense. Plus, it's also really fun to watch just personally, but you can really only get away with that if the pass protection is at least below average. On true pass sets, he has the lowest pass blocking grade among all centers at 25.5. If he's just a below average pass blocker, you can live with that at the center position considering what he gives you in the run game. But if he gets a matchup like Derrick Brown, he just doesn't stand much of a chance. I still think he could start in the NFL as like the worst offensive lineman on a good O-line, but Tennessee has to devote so much attention and resources to their tackles. He's just in too many one-on-one situations. Daniel Brunskill plays and looks like a 48-year-old. He's good if he doesn't really have to move his feet, but once you get him out in open space, the athletic limitations are just debilitating. He's another player that I think is ideally the worst offensive lineman on a good O-line. And then Dillon Radunz is going to join Jaelyn Duncan in the bad tier. I do think he's been like a half step better than Jaelyn Duncan, but I'm ready for the Dillon Radunz experience to be over. Not only is he a very limited player, he has the second highest penalty rate among offensive linemen, second to Jawan Taylor. He's another player that's pretty much just target practice for pass rushers. They can just choose whatever move they want to work and they're gonna have success. I think his biggest weakness as a pass blocker is still his anchor. He just has no answer for power, but he'll still give up the corner. He's got a soft inside hand. Again, like I said with Jaelyn Duncan, it's really just a 3-way go. There have been some nice run blocks recently. He had a pretty good rep against DeForest Buckner on a down block, and against Miami, I saw him pick up an inside spin from Andrew Van Ginkel, but overall, not very good. If you're enjoying the video, make sure to subscribe and leave a like, and also follow us on all of our social medias. The links to those are in the description. Okay, onto the defense. Now, like I've said, I do these tiers with the more recent games weighted more heavily, but I still do consider the season holistically. With Harold Landry, it's kind of a different situation because he was coming back from the ACL tear. Really, after the bye week, he's looked like a completely different player. So I'm gonna make an exception and just evaluate him after week 7. I'm moving him up 2 tiers to solid. He had 6 pressures and 2 sacks before the bye. After the bye week, He's had 27 pressures and 7 sacks. A couple of those have been unblocked. One of them was on Tua where he slipped and he just got a hand on him. But even ignoring some of those sacks, I've been so impressed with Harold Landry as a pass rusher, not just in comparison to what he was early in the season. This is as good as I've ever seen him play. I've always been kind of low on Harold Landry. To me, he's just a speed rusher that doesn't really have a changeup. He hasn't been great winning with power. He doesn't do much with his hands. But over these last few weeks, I'm seeing him win around the edge. He's actually creating displacement as a power rusher. He had a really nice cross chop against the Colts. He beat Austin Jackson against Miami with a ghost move that he uses pretty often. We still haven't seen him be a face-up rusher that can win with his hands in either direction, but we've been hearing for years about how he's going to diversify his pass rushing skill set. This is the first time I've actually seen that happen on the football field. Now, the competition that he's had that success against was Blake Freeland, backup rookie offensive tackle for the Colts, and Austin Jackson, who just got paid, but he's really, to me, more of a run blocker. Against Taylor Moton, who's a quality pass blocking right tackle for the Panthers, he didn't do much of anything. So I'm not ready to call him a tier 1 or even tier 2 edge rusher, but he's clearly getting back to full strength, and we're actually, I think, seeing some development at 28 years old. Arden Key's going back up 1 to the solid tier. If there was a group between solid and average, I'd just put him there permanently. I wish they would give him more opportunities to rush on the interior. The way that he would win a lot in Jacksonville is by exploiting his quickness advantage over guards. Matched up one-on-one with a tackle, that athletic advantage just isn't as extreme, and he's really light, so on the back 30% of the rush, it's really easy to knock him off of his path. That's why I think he gets a lot of pass rushing wins and some pressures, but he just isn't able to finish those as often. And then I'm also going to move Denico Autry up 1 tier. He was a force against the Panthers. He had some dominant reps going up against the third string guard that had pretty much never played, but then he followed that up with just as good of a performance against the Colts. He isn't getting as many quick wins this year by beating the blockers' hands, but he is having a lot more success as a power rusher. He's got that quick initial strike to get into the blocker's frame and drive them back, and he plays with so much effort just in pursuit from the backside of the run. So he's definitely been one of the Titans' 5 or 6 best players this year. And then I haven't had Rashad Weaver in one of these videos at all. He's played enough snaps, I think, to include him, and I'm gonna have him in the bad tier. He's just a completely ineffective pass rusher. Overall, I think John Robinson got into a bad habit of drafting these limited athletes that were just good college football players, and there are some positions that you can get away with that in moderation, but pass rusher is not one of them. There's just no explosiveness off the snap. He can't bend around the corner at all. Anytime he tries to rush the outside shoulder, he's going to end up on the ground, and he doesn't really have the length or quickness to win with his hands, so there's not a whole lot that he can do. For defensive line, Jeffrey Simmons is going to stay put in the good tier. I've said in, I think, most of these videos that he needs to improve as a run defender, and he's definitely done that over the last few weeks. I could have missed a play, but I haven't noticed a pancake since the Steelers game in week 9. It was just once or twice every week he was getting put on his back as a run defender, and he's definitely improved his anchor recently and continued to make plays in the backfield like he always has. I will say, after the first 3 or 4 weeks of the season, I have been pretty underwhelmed with his pass rushing. If it isn't a third down where he's just firing off the snap, he doesn't seem to change gears very quickly. So there's a lot of plays where he's kind of just hanging back, not making much of an impact. He's still probably the best player on this team. It's just, I think he has top 3 defensive tackle potential, and I think he has a ways to go with his consistency to reach that level. I'm moving Teair Tart down 1 from good to solid. The Dolphins game was probably the worst that I've ever seen him. It's a difficult rushing offense to defend, but he got put on the ground a couple times. I saw him get moved back by a single block from the 5-yard line, probably like 6 or 7 yards into the end zone. Against the Colts, he had a play where he got reached about 10 yards down the field, and he just hasn't made much of a positive impact recently. Only 1 run stop in the last 3 weeks, which if you don't rush the passer, that's pretty much the only thing I have to evaluate. For linebacker, we're gonna start with Jack Gibbens, and I'm gonna split him in half. I've got Jack Gibbens moving on the y-axis in the solid tier, and Jack Gibbens moving on the x-axis in the disaster tier. So anytime he's just in a tight space on the vertical plane, not being asked to cover a lot of ground, he's a solid linebacker. He hardly ever gets lost. He's good with his eyes. He's not really a stack and shed linebacker, but he does a good job using his hands to kind of maneuver through traffic, and he's a solid tackler as long as he's able to get to that point. But if he ever has to beat someone to the edge, it's just a guarantee guaranteed loss. You saw him obviously get beat by any of Miami's ball carriers, but Tua beat him to the edge in week 14. So usually linebacker doesn't really matter in the sense that it's not a position you want to invest that heavily in, but for next year, they have to get someone with at least average speed. It doesn't show up in every game, but if an offense really wants to exploit it, it's just an easy button they can hit with pretty much a 100% success rate. And then Azeez Al-Shaair is going to stay put. I don't have much more to add on him that I haven't already said. He's pretty fast. He can make unblocked tackles, but he's not a great block shedder. He can carry routes down the seam in like Tampa 2 or something, but if he's got to diagnose routes that are developing behind him in zone coverage, he gets lost pretty much every time. And I would just say he's the definition of a league average linebacker. I wouldn't have a problem with them bringing him back next year though. For corners, Christian Fulton's going to stay in the bad tier, going to IR, probably the last game that we saw him play in a Titans uniform. Sean Murphy-Bunting is going to come down 2 tiers from his hot start early in the season. He's a high variance player, inconsistent game to game. He had his worst game of the season against the Colts, pretty much 2 game losing plays back to back. And then the Dolphins game was kind of a microcosm of what he is as a player. He has the pass interference that puts him in the red zone. Then he makes a great open field tackle, pass breakup on the goal line fade to force a field goal. He just isn't that effective when he isn't able to land his punch at the line of scrimmage, whether he misses with his hands or he's playing soft shoe press or he's playing off coverage. The short area burst and closing acceleration to make up that 2 or 3 yards of separation, he just doesn't really seem to have. And then when he is able to punch at the line of scrimmage, he's way too grabby in his transitions out of press. If you're jamming at the line of scrimmage, you're going to want to keep your hands attached and stay in phase, but you've still got to alter your hand placement as you transition downfield. He'll just press the receiver for 10 yards, and that's what's caused a lot of his holding penalties and illegal contacts this year. I've got Roger McCreary staying in the good tier. I thought he was great to start out the season. He had a stretch towards the middle where he was getting beat a little bit more. The Bucs game was really rough. He started to get called for some penalties. I think he's returned to his early season form over the last few weeks. He doesn't get that many opportunities for stats. He actually dropped an interception in the Colts game, but for slot corners, it can be a lot harder to get interceptions and pass breakups. Looking at his stats, he actually has 3 pass breakups the last 3 weeks, but just watching every snap, he plays consistent tight coverage. I'm sure part of it is second year development, but I also think he's the perfect example of how usage is so important, especially for defensive backs. What they were doing last year, trying to play him in so much off coverage, he just isn't really built for that. But playing a lot of press from the slot, he looks really comfortable. He's continued to be an impact in run defense, and I would say he's been without a doubt the Titans' most improved player this year. Final position group is safety, and we're going to start with Amani Hooker, who's moving up 2 tiers into solid. I was pretty disappointed with how he started off the year. He was getting beat about once or twice a game and wasn't making that many impact plays, but the last 2 weeks he's been playing his best football. He had a really nice pass breakup against Miami where he's in the middle of Tampa 2. They run the concept they always run with the wheel route and then the seam from the tight end. He recognizes that immediately, covers a lot of space, breaks up the pass. He had a pass breakup in the goal line against the Colts to basically save a touchdown to Michael Pittman. He had the pick 6 on the 2-point conversion that was basically just thrown right to him. And then he had the game-winning tackle on the 4th and 6 screen from the Panthers game. So he's been all over the field. Good to see him getting back to being a playmaker. I've got Elijah Molden in the below average tier. I could honestly make the case for bad. He gave up a touchdown early in the Colts game on a coverage bust. If you're Elijah Molden, like, you can't be a coverage bust guy. He's not an elite athlete. He's not this crazy playmaker. Being sound in coverage assignments is the one thing that you have to bring to the table. And then the other thing is he's getting matched up with offensive linemen a lot more often now that he's playing safety. He could kind of dominate blocks from receivers when he was playing in the slot, but when he comes down to fit the run and he's got a guard in his face, he just gets engulfed. And then final player to discuss is a new one, Kayvon Wallace. I've got him in the solid tier. He's an explosive athlete. He's been a great tackler so far. He's only been with the Titans for 4 games, and pretty much all I've seen from him is him just flying around the field making tackles. He hasn't really been in a lot of compromising coverage situations, but there's a lot of athletic upside there, and I'm not sure you want him as your starting safety, but from everything I've seen, I would be in favor of bringing him back next year. Again, though, a safety could play an entire game, and they might not be put in one point of attack situation in coverage, so we'll see what that looks like when the time comes. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy the video, make sure to like and subscribe. Also, let me know in the comments any NFL players or teams that you'd like me to cover.